throw. One-on-one, Davis has it. Touchdown! Carolina wins! Carolina is the Coastal Division champion! Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go, man there! Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol, Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson, he tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted! Surratt intercepts it! Holy cow, Carolina's gonna win! And off to Javonte Williams again, pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back, pressure coming, Aguilar floats it up, incomplete! No flags! Head on back up the mountain! Carolina wins it in double overtime! Loftus, out of the shotgun, throws to the end zone, incomplete! Incomplete! The bell belongs to us! Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime!
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
Oh yeah, guys. Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast here on a Friday night. I know it's a little bit later than we normally do it. I know this is also not the normal locations that you're used to us doing the podcast from, but having to adjust on the fly. It's been a little bit of a crazy week, but here we are getting you ready tonight for Carolina's home opener in the 2024 season as they get ready to take on the Charlotte 49ers. I know this is a game that you are very pumped up for, more than I think a lot of people would probably expect. Do you want to explain to the people why you are so pumped up about this game in particular?
You know, Charlotte fans to run their mouth after getting beat by 3 touchdowns at home in their home opener last week by James Madison, but that's been the tune of their fan base. They think after not being able to beat James Madison at home, they're going to travel up to Chapel Hill and beat a North Carolina team that went on the road last week and handed the Big Ten their only loss in the opening week of the season. So, again, going into it, didn't think I had any ill will toward Charlotte fans because most of the time during basketball season, they support the Tar Heels. But nonetheless, they think that they're going to go into our stadium tomorrow and win. So with that being said, I hope we get a focused, motivated, driven UNC team that comes out tomorrow and lays the hammer down and makes Biff Poggi lie and come up with more excuses in the media as to why he's failed as a head coach and why his program sucks.
Well, I mean, look, I'm not going to go after Biff Poggi. I think Biff Poggi is a fine man. He said that earlier in the week. When you think of the state of North Carolina, the team you should think of is Carolina. So he knows the truth. We like that. It's just, some of the fans feeling confident. And as you mentioned, I mean, this is the 11th year of existence for the 49ers. It'll be the first time that the Tar Heels match up with the in-state opponent. Now, of course, they were at one time an FCS team. Then they end up coming up to the FBS. They've made a quick ascent into the American Conference where they are at now, but they're coming off a season that was not great a year ago where they went 3-9. They suffered a loss that I don't think many of their fans saw coming. A 30-7 loss to James Madison to open the year. And look, James Madison was a really good football team last year. That's a team that lost their head coach, that lost their starting quarterback, and that lost countless other guys that either followed Kirk Cignetti, their head coach, to Indiana or went to other schools. So, I mean, look, this is a team that Charlotte should have been able to compete with, and it looked like a lot of the same for them. Now, we'll break down the Niners here in just a second, but first, when you look at home openers for Carolina, they've had pretty good success. They haven't lost a home opener since 2017, and Mac Brown, as you can tell from that, is perfect in home openers since returning to Chapel Hill. He also had some pretty good success the first time around in those home openers. Now, one interesting stat is that the program is 7-5 in games against Group of 5 in-state teams since 2000. Now, the majority of those matchups did come against East Carolina. They played the Pirates just a ton, and really didn't play a lot of other Group of 5 teams in the state. In recent years, we've seen them, of course, play App State a few different times. But now Charlotte is the group that they're going to be going up against. And, I mean, look, this is one of the easier in-state Group of 5 opponents. It's not a slight to Charlotte. It's just that you look at what they've done the last few years. I mean, they were hoping that a new voice like Biff Poggi coming in would sort of elevate them after they didn't have a great finish to the Will Healy era here, but that hasn't really happened. They're 0-1 this season, of course. Last year, 3-9, 2-6 in the American Conference. They finished the season a lot better than they started the season, but it still wasn't great. Of course, first game, they had 7 points in that game, just 324 yards of total offense, 193 passing yards, and 131 rushing yards. Very similar to the issues that they had a year ago, where they simply could not score. Now, with this team, they're hoping to lean on quarterback Max Brown, a transfer from Florida, who had a rough showing in the opener, and he's going to be motivated to bounce back from it. 22 of 25, 193 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Also lost a fumble. So 3 turnovers from him, certainly not what Charlotte was hoping he would be able to bring to the table. At running back, Tyron Kelman is the guy that led them in rushing in the first game, but he splits carries with Cartavius Norton and Hassan Wilson in the backfield. So there'll be a group of guys that will get an opportunity to carry the football. Also, a name to keep an eye on back there, they're trying to get him more involved in the offense, is Henry Rutledge. So he could be a guy that at some point takes a carry on the night as well. Pass catchers, widely unproven group. Sean Brown, really the guy that stood out last week at wide receiver, and their tight end Colin Weber was another guy who had a really strong performance in that opener. But the rest of the group really isn't all that great, including a former Tar Heel, Justin Olson, who got the start in the game the other night, was targeted just one time and did drop that only pass. But they've got other guys like Omega Blake, who's a transfer from South Carolina. They're looking for those guys to step up, and last week that did not happen. On the offensive line, it's a collection of pieces led by a couple of transfers, with Jordan Herman, as well as there are a couple of other transfers that they have there as well. And then they've got a really good young left tackle in Kendall Stanley, who they're hoping can help anchor that group for years to come. Now, one important loss for them on the offensive line, Jordan Spajovic Moku, who started last week for them, a transfer from Texas A&M. He is going to be out with an undisclosed injury. So that's huge news after he performed very well in that first game. So when you look at this Charlotte offense, what type of threat do you think that this Charlotte offense could potentially pose, if any, towards the Tar Heel defense?
Yeah, none. There's no excuse for Carolina to not build off of what they did last week defensively. If this is a game that becomes somewhat of a shootout and it's 31-28 in the fourth quarter, there's going to have to be a serious conversation because there's simply no excuse. And I know the talking point around campus has been we've played good in the first game of the year defensively, and then it's all been downhill. That's the reality of the situation. We saw it last year. It didn't take, I mean, it didn't take long for what you did against South Carolina to be quickly forgotten about. So there's frankly just no excuse. Every single player for Charlotte that plays at a meaningful position is lesser talented than what Carolina has defensively. There's not a lot of talent on that side of the football, and so I expect Jeff Collins to dial up the intensity and the aggressiveness and really make this game a living hell for Max Brown. If Carolina could do what they did last week, and I thought their pressure on Minnesota was good, then we should expect that to take a step forward in this game. They should build off of that performance. So, I expect this defense that played with its hair on fire last week to really duplicate that success against a lesser offensive team in Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen performances from this team in the past where, they drop off a little bit. Primarily, the one you look at is last year. Great performance out of the gate against South Carolina. Struggle to stop an App State team that I think at the time we thought, okay, how good really is this offense? But we learned as the year went along that Joey Aguilar was a legitimate quarterback and that we've always known that they've had a very solid run game. This is not that team. Not even close. There is no excuse for Carolina in this game. You cannot let this team have success against you. Because if you do, then, there's going to be some serious talking points on the podcast, and there's going to be some serious anger because this is one of the worst offensive teams, if not the worst offensive team that you will play the whole year. NC Central will pose more of a threat to you offensively. It's a team that won 9 games last year at the FCS level. So for Carolina, I mean, look, I know that there is talent on that offense for Charlotte. Maybe they just didn't get off to the greatest start. Maybe it's because they are, still trying to mesh and work together as a unit. It doesn't matter, especially with a guy that they were hoping would be a big part of their offensive line being injured. Jordan Herman, the transfer that I talked about, he only played 42 snaps in the game the other night, while most of their other starters played in the high 60s or into the low 70s. So that tells me that he was on and off the field as well for them. So this is a game where Carolina's defense should be able to stand up and make a statement. You move over to the defensive side of the ball for the Niners. 30 points allowed in the first game, 413 yards of total offense, 219 allowed through the air, and 194 allowed on the ground. The linebackers, strength of the unit, probably with Reed Williford and Prince Bima. Those are guys that have been, for Bima, he's been around a while, been in the program for years, and they're expecting him to take that next step this year. For Williford, I think he's more of a pleasant surprise, but he led the team in tackling a week ago against James Madison. The defensive line, some promise off the edge with guys like Stone Handy, Chance Williams. Damon Clowney is a name that probably sounds familiar to a lot of people, and it should. That is the cousin of current Carolina Panthers edge rusher Jadeveon Clowney, but he's not exactly on the same level as Jadeveon was. Still a guy that they're hoping takes another step this year. But the biggest thing for them is the interior of their defensive line. It got manhandled a week ago. That's the strength of Carolina's offensive line, is the interior guys. And so that's a matchup that you would like to see Carolina win. The secondary, hit or miss. There are times where their secondary looks really good, and there's other times where they allow a lot of big plays down the field. And Dante Balfour is really the perfect the perfect guy that encompasses that. Look, last year, all-conference player, well-deserved because he had 54 tackles, an interception, and 11 pass deflections. But in the opener, I mean, he just showed you what type of player he is. 4 targets, only 2 of them were caught, but they went for 50 yards, and one of the incompletions that happened was him pulling down an interception. So he's a talented guy. There's another guy that Carolina fans are very familiar with in Jaquarius Conley, who, we'll have to see if he's able to play. He did not play last week for the team. And so this is a group, when you look at them defensively, that, Carolina, I know, again, there is some talent. Carolina's offense, though, should be able to put up some points against this group.
Yeah, the biggest thing the next 3 weeks for Carolina offensively is finding out who they are with Connor Harrell as their quarterback, finding out what your identity is going to look like. And I think you and I, as much as anybody, A, in the fan base, or B, that covers the team and has a platform to talk about it, we believe in Connor Harrell and his ability as a quarterback and the arm strength and everything. And so, that's what you like about these next 3 games is they're all games that Carolina should win rather comfortably. He'll be at home with 50+ thousand people supporting him, as opposed to last week where he had 50-something thousand people against him. And so that was the beauty of the schedule. And we talked about even before Max Johnson getting hurt, like the first game was all about, hey, find a way to win. The next 3 games was going to be figure out who you were on offense. Mm-hmm. That hasn't changed now that Max Johnson's done for the year and Connor Harrell's now your starting quarterback. This is a defense that I think as the game moves along, Carolina should be able to wear them out. And by the third, fourth quarter, really put the game away. That's kind of been Charlotte's the struggles under Biff Poggi in his year plus on the job. They're going to compete hard for a quarter, maybe even 2 quarters. Like this might be a game that's 14-3 at the half, but they don't have the depth to hold up. And if Carolina could wear down Minnesota, and that's what they did last week. You go back and watch the fourth quarter, man, Carolina was blowing off the ball and moving that defensive front backwards. That should be the same case this week against a team with less talent and less depth. So really excited to see what this offense looks like with Chip Lindsey having a full week to prepare for Connor Harrell to be his starting quarterback.
You look at the Niners special teams, Carolina's going to have to be aware of Henry Rutledge as the kick returner, one of the best in the group of 5. And so, look, Carolina covered kicks very well last week. One that was returned was only returned for 14 yards, but they need to be on top of their game this week if every one of those kickoffs does not go through the back of the end zone. Meanwhile, you look at the kickers for them. They place kicker. They're kind of rotating back and forth. Their depth chart has Kyle Cunin as the top guy, but he's a guy that has an or next to his name, so there is a possibility that their place kicker battle is still wide open. And their punter situation, Michael O'Shaughnessy, at his 3rd school after transferring from Michigan State in the offseason. He had an up and down week, to say the least, last week, including a 3-yard punt at one point. So if Carolina can get some pressure on him, I think he's a guy that is prone to some mistakes. You move on to the Tar Heel side of things in this game, and you talked about it, finding your rhythm offensively, and mainly it's got to be this passing game that has to improve. And I think you talked about 50,000 that were against Connor Harrell. Well, it almost seemed like it was 50,001, which included his offensive coordinator, Chip Lindsey, who did not seem to have much of a game plan for Connor Harrell entering the game. And I don't understand why, considering you came up with a game plan that was pretty successful offensively, at least in terms of moving the football in the bowl game for Connor Harrell. For some reason, it didn't seem like Chip Lindsey was confident in his quarterback. I don't understand how that's possible, especially since he had an offseason to grow in certain areas. But Chip Lindsey's got to believe in his guy now, and he needs to set him up for more success out of the gate. And that starts by getting the short passing game going early, something that we talked about him not doing last week for Max Johnson against Minnesota.
Expect to see the tight ends used early and often in this game. And really, I expect to see a lot of RPOs, really just kind of get him in the rhythm and the flow of the game. He had the big pass play to J.J. Jones last week on an RPO decision where, he pulled the ball drew a defensive back, and then threw it over the top for a big gain. Like, that's his game. And so, I think the thing that Chip Lindsey did a really bad job of last week was not adjusting to the situation, not adjusting to the scenario, which was you had a game plan for Max Johnson. Max Johnson gets hurt. You never adjusted to Connor Harrell, which really tells you they had no intention of him playing in the game, even though Mac Brown said all week that they were going to play 2 quarterbacks. So you go back to the bowl game before Connor Harrell got injured, you saw what the offense was capable of looking like. I think, Chip Lindsey is capable of putting together a game plan for him. They want to run the ball. They want to lean on Amari and Hampton, but I think he'll be better set up for success. And for those that are kind of on the fence about him, I think you'll be able to see his talent shine through in a big way and make Tar Heel fans a believer in him moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, Mac Brown said earlier this week, you got to believe in this guy. This is our guy moving forward. And, I mean, look, there's resistance from – I didn't see it too much from Tar Heel fans. It's a lot more national people, and I don't really get it, man. Go back and watch that bowl game, and there were things to really like about him. I mean, we said exiting that bowl game when we were recapping that game, look, there's not a lot that you can take away from this because it was not a great performance. But the one thing that we know is we feel confident we have our quarterback of the future. And that was with Max Johnson already having committed to Carolina. We said, this is the guy because the mobility is there. The arm strength is there. That's the other thing to me that, and you could say maybe it's the offensive line, and we'll talk about them here. I mean, well, why don't we talk about them here right now? I think that's part of it, honestly, is that his offensive line has to set him up for success because last week they weren't great in front of Max Johnson, especially early in that first half. I mean, Howard Sampson, you could tell, first career start, struggling a little bit with a veteran defensive line of Minnesota, and he's just got to be better. I mean, he allowed 3 total pressures. One of them was a sack. Trevion Green allows a sack as well. Another quarterback pressure allowed from him. So I think that's the thing is the offensive line has to be better in front of the quarterbacks in order for there to be more confidence that these guys can get the ball downfield, something that I think Connor Harrell is capable of doing, and this Charlotte defense could be susceptible to.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you want to see tomorrow is better play on, at the tackle position. Carolina in the interior looked really good last week, which is a good sign because, you got to be able to move people around up front in the middle if you want to be a good team that can run the football. But the big reason why their passing game never really found a rhythm was that there was never a whole lot of time for Max Johnson or Connor Harrell to just stand there in a clean pocket and kind of dissect the defense. And look, we knew going in it was an offensive line that very inexperienced. There's an offensive line that had not played together. This was going to always be a work in progress. And so this is a game that you expect to see them clean up some of the mistakes, them be a little bit more cohesive up front, and really look the part of an offensive line that can give this team a chance week in, week out to put points up on the board in the manner that they need to. So, we said going into the year that we liked all the changes up front. It felt like it was something that was needed for the program, but we weren't expecting them to look like a finished product in week 1. So you build off what you did off last week up the middle. Willie Lampkin is going to be the heart and soul of this offensive line, but you expect to see the talent of a Trevion Green, of a Howard Sampson better on display. And if that's the case, you'll see Connor Harrell and this offense look a lot more explosive than it did last week at Minnesota.
Yeah, and this is a much easier defensive line to go up against. Plus, you're at home. Now you've got to start under your belt. Like, that's the thing. When you look back on it, it's hard to really be that critical of either one of those guys. I mean, Trevion Green rarely played. He was a guy that was just trying to stay healthy his first couple of years at Carolina. Howard Sampson is a guy that, towards the end of last year, he started to play in games for North Texas. There were really 2 games where he saw extensive snaps, and neither one of them he started. So for those guys, that was their first time facing that on the road against a Big Ten group that, as we know, I mean, Minnesota's a really tough team in the trenches. That's an area that you have to be good at in the Big Ten. And I think it really showed through. So, I mean, you look at some of the things that they did, especially in run blocking, there's reasons to be confident. And speaking of the running game, one of the other things that is going to be really interesting to watch from a Carolina perspective is how do they manage the running backs? Because there is no way that you want Omarion Hampton having to touch the ball 35 times in this game. That's how many times he touched it last week. That's the most in a regulation game so far in his career. And look, there's no guarantee that the passing game is going to be good enough to carry this team at times like it has the last 5 years prior to this year under Sam Howell and Drake May. So they are probably going to have to lean on Omarion Hampton in similar ways to what we saw in that Minnesota game as they get later into the season. This is one of those games. It's the start of really a 3-game stretch where Carolina is going to have to mix and match the running backs in the backfield on certain drives. And I'm interested to see how the coaching staff goes about using guys like Darwin Barlow, Davian Gauss, and I'll throw Caleb Hood in there, but at this point, who knows? He didn't even make the trip to Minnesota, so who knows if he's even going to be active.
Yeah, this is a game that best case scenario, Hampton touches the ball at a maximum 20 times. And hopefully with this, he's a lot more explosive in his touches to still kind of get up the yards that you want to see him have. But this is what Mack Brown talked about when he met with the media on Monday, is that, last week was just a case of, with the way the game was being played, combined with the injury at quarterback, they knew he was going to have to touch the ball. That should not be the case this week. You should be able to rotate him in and out of the game. They've talked up Darwin Barlow. They like what he did in fall camp. We've heard Mack Brown rave about Gauss as well. So this is a game where you can afford to put those guys in, even if the game is a 2-possession game in the third quarter. Like it's okay to really use those other guys, because the last thing you need is running him into the ground. And if you have the type of start that you're capable of having with your schedule, this guy being out of gas by the back half of the season, or let alone injured. And so, this is something that Mack Brown has kind of talked about on his, he's got to be accountable of his own self. Like he said all summer long, they tried to rotate him last year. I did not let him, because that's how important he was. Mm-hmm. He's more important this year because you don't have Drake May playing quarterback, but you got to be able to use other guys. And so the hope is that this is a game that you could hopefully maybe not have to use him at all in the fourth quarter, and you can really use your other guys, get them some experience, get them some reps, but more importantly, just take some wear and tear off the body of Omarion Hampton, because the hits will add up as the season moves along.
Yeah, and I'm confident that they're going to do that, because what Mack Brown talked about, not using him as much in the preseason when they were going through camp. And I think he knows that, you've got to find a way to keep him healthy. If you lose him, this team's in trouble. I get it that you've got guys in Barlow and Gauss that you feel confident in. Well, if you feel confident in them, then let's use them. Let's use them, because they did a great job of rotating on the defensive side of the ball. They didn't lie to us there. And we knew that with Jeff Collins coming in and having looked Mack Brown in the eye during his interview for the job and telling him, you didn't rotate enough last year, that was going to happen. They rotated the offensive line. We saw Jakiah Leftwich in there. We saw Malik McGowan in there. So 7 guys they used along that offensive line. And that could even increase as the season goes along if somebody else steps up that they really trust. So you're seeing the rotation there. Let's see it at running back as well. And I think, honestly, they also need to do it a little bit at wide receiver, especially if a guy like Nate McCullum is going to continue to produce the way that he's producing. If Christian Hamilton struggles a little bit, those are the positions where you want to see Carolina rotating a little bit in this game, albeit for different reasons. Move over to the defensive side of the ball. I think one of the biggest things there is, does the front seven maintain the success from week one? Really, it's the front six, because Carolina just plays the two linebackers. They play with 5 defensive backs more often than not. And I mean, look, I think what they showed us last week was different than what they showed us a year ago, where South Carolina's offensive line was just terrible. Like, there was no way around that. And that was seen for the rest of the season. Minnesota, the fact that you got 5 sacks on them, and look, 4 of them actually came from defensive linemen, because you would consider Kamen Rucker defensive linemen. But you were able to get some pressure with the way that you blitzed. I thought you saw the aggression from Jeff Collins, and I still think that's going to be there. But for this group, I think it's really just about not reading the press clippings and just going back out there and doing what you did last week. For a guy like Jahvaree Ritzie, it probably doesn't mean you're going to have 3 more sacks, but following that up with a strong performance, that's what you're looking for from everyone across the board down there in the trenches.
Yeah, and I think there's reason to be confident, because you don't have a defensive coordinator that's going to rest on his laurels. And that was the one thing you could really say about Gene Chizik was, it never felt like, after what they did in the South Carolina game, they never really built off of that. It was like they were satisfied and content with what that game was and what it produced. That's not good enough. That's not how you compete to win championships. And I think the other thing you have to like is that, man, this room is just hungry, and they don't want last week to be the bright spot of the year. And so, look, a big thing is going to be, how do you handle prosperity? Like, Jahvaree Ritzie got not just some local love. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit was raving about him. There was some national love that he was getting for his performance. So
Yep.
do you use that to fuel you to get, more recognition, or do you pat yourself on the back and say, man, I did a really good job? I just don't think with Jeff Collins, man, he's going to let these guys just ease up. That's one intense guy, to put it lightly, and he's an aggressive guy. And every day he's going to attack you. And, I think when they went through their film study, I think they see the issues that exist up front for Charlotte, and they understand that there's a chance to really exploit them and really dominate them in a way that they could really control the game up front from the line of scrimmage. So, I think there's reason to be hesitant, because we've seen this. We've seen good performances in the past and to not carry over. I think the change of attitude, the change in leadership will impact that. And I'm excited to see this defensive line tomorrow get after it, because there's a chance they could have a field day against the Charlotte offense.
I think also a lot of credit has to go to Ted Monachino, a guy that's been at the NFL level, has coached some of the best at the college level. This dude is going to hold these guys accountable. Same thing with a guy like Jimmy Lindsey, who comes from a defensive line room at LSU where there was a standard. Every week, you need to look like you looked last week, because if you didn't in the SEC, you weren't going to win. If you didn't at the NFL level, you weren't going to win. So I think those 3 guys, you're going to hold these guys accountable. And guess what? I mean, I think last year will probably be used as an example. They will look at that and say, remember how great of a start we got off to last year and how we were feeling ourselves as a unit? Well, only one guy really was able to benefit from that game moving forward, and that was Kamen Rucker. You guys can all be like Kamen Rucker. Jahvaree Ritzie can be this year's Kamen Rucker. He can be the guy that breaks out and becomes a consistent force on that defensive line. It is possible. It's just about the mindset. So, I'll be interested to see what that group looks, but I feel more confident this year than I felt last year. The other big question when you look at the defense, to me, it's, can you clean up some of the mistakes that you had? And that was really tackling and other secondary miscues. So tackling wise, you missed 14 tackles in this game. Not great, but it's a season opener, so you're not going to blast them too much, and you found a way to win the game. Still, it's something they need to be working on, especially because that is something that we heard Mac Brown talk about extensively. We heard Jeff Collins talk about extensively. This has to be a cleaner week from those guys, mainly the two safeties on the back end, veterans, both guys in their final year of eligibility at the college level. They've played a lot of college football, and Jakeen Harris looked good. He had 10 total tackles, but you missed 3. Stick Lane, another solid night for him in terms of the number of tackles that he had. But he actually 3 tackles in the game. He misses more tackles than he actually had. He had 4 missed tackles. So those are the guys that you need to lead by example and clean that up. And then the other secondary miscues, a couple of blown coverages from Caleb Cost, which was something we didn't see from him in the bowl game against West Virginia. First career start, though, on the road. Maybe, that was leading to some of those issues that he had. And then Marcus Allen, a veteran guy, he was targeted 3 times on the night. He lets up 1 big play down the field, and then the other 2, he commits pass interference penalties on. As bad of a performance as we've seen from him, how does he bounce back? And how, just as a whole, this group has to clean up those mistakes.
Yeah, I think the thing is season opener on the road in a new defense. And so there was going to be an adjustment period because, you can work on stuff in practice, but, games are different. And so tackling is always at its worst the first week of the year because they don't really tackle a whole lot in preseason anymore. Even as physical as Mac Brown said this camp was, you're still not fully tackling like you used to when you were, back when, preseason was preseason and training camp was training camp. So I expect that to be much improved this week. The best thing, and I talked about it after the game, the more encouraging sign was that guys were actually in position to make plays. Whereas usually we're complaining about guys not being in position to make plays and we're giving up big play after big play. And so, we know the talent, the depth that exists in that room. I don't think Mac Brown's confidence has wavered after what they did last week. So I don't think our confidence should waver. You're going up against a quarterback that's, can turn the football over. It's not like they've got wide receivers that really scare you anyway. So this should be a game where if the defensive line does what the defensive line is capable of doing, that this secondary really feasts and really just controls the game and kind of keeps everything in check. So I expect a bounce back performance from some guys that had some subpar week 1 performances, but also see some guys build up what they did in week 1. His name just dropped my mind, but I expect that to happen. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
I'm trying to think of who you could be thinking of here. Not sure. But yeah, and look, you got a good leader, guy that had a great week last week in Elijah Huzzy that's going to hold everybody accountable. The thing that I just want to see here as well, and I don't know, look, Will Hardy, I think, may have been banged up last week. That was something that was sort of kept under wraps. He played in the game. Either that or if he did get hurt, I think it may have been on the one play that he was actually in the game. And so that limited Carolina from being able to rotate. Didn't see a lot of DeAndre Boykins. If Harris and Lane continue to struggle tackling-wise, I think at some point you got to see Boykins. Let's see that depth that you raved about back there. Let's rotate these guys in a little bit. And when guys make mistakes, let's hold them accountable. They did with Marcus Allen. They pulled him off the field. The problem was Tyrone Stewart, who came on. He came on and missed 2 tackles himself. So, yeah, it's just this was the group that was raved about the most in the preseason. And it was the group that honestly probably performed the worst on this defense in the opener. So you really just want to see them take that next step. The last thing that I'm looking for from a Tar Heel perspective is, does the discipline carry over? Carolina had 3 penalties for 45 yards in the opener. That we just don't see that happen. Even last year's opener, Carolina got penalized. That was one of the things we left that game a little frustrated with. And I mean, last year, you look at how bad things got towards the end of the season. Carolina came out on the road, new starters along the offensive line. All but one of them had, not started a game in their career. And somehow you commit just 3 penalties the entire game. That's something that Mack Brown said. We are enforcing that this year. There are punishments for guys that commit penalties. They're stricter than they've been in years past. So I think you saw it in week 1. It paid off. Now guys can't get complacent and let them, let it get back to where things were last year and the year before. They have to remain disciplined in this game.
Yeah, and I think when you enforce it the way that it was enforced and you actually punish guys for not being disciplined, it carries over. And I think that's something that Mack Brown had to readjust to when he got back into coaching, was how difficult or how much of a hard ass can you be? You could look at games in every season, and penalties played a role in games like those games that they should have won that they lost. You probably look at the penalties that they committed and when they committed them, that probably played a factor in why they got beat.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if Carolina can continue to limit the penalties, that's really going to carry over into the back end of the season. This time of the year, yes, it's all about winning. Every game is all about winning, but it's also about building habits that will carry over the length of the season. And so if Carolina can commit 3 to 4 penalties a game in September, that'll show up in October, and it should show up in November when you've got, a couple big road tests that will determine how the season ultimately plays out. So, and the other thing is if they commit penalties, take the butts out of the game. Yep. I mean, we didn't see a whole lot of Marcus Allen last week because he had 2 pass interference penalties. So that's the best way to hold people accountable. Bench them. So I've liked the messaging from day one because I never thought it was a fluke. There's sometimes you can hear a coach talk and you can just tell. Especially with you, what we do on a day in, day out basis, I know a coach's BS meter pretty good. Mack Brown wasn't playing around when he was talking about how much they were going to enforce the discipline and whether it was going to be running them after practice or whatever. So I think the message to this team is, hey, we're not good enough to come out here and commit 7-8 penalties a game and win. Yep. We weren't good at the last couple of years, even with the great quarterback play that we had. So I think that message has really been driven home, and I expect to see a clean, crisp performance tomorrow because if not, those guys are going to be running, and no one likes to run.
Well, and here's the thing. Every other year we heard how, we're working on building depth. Certain positions, we think we have the depth. The truth was they didn't have the depth. They didn't. And now they do. And you can see what a difference it makes. When you have depth, you can actually enforce stuff like that because when you say, hey, if you mess up, we're pulling you out of the game, they mean it. And we saw it. There was a clear drop-off, at least from what I saw, from Marcus Allen to Tyrone Stewart. There is. But the staff views it as, look, there isn't enough of a gap where we're not going to take you out of the game and put you on the sideline for a few plays and make you learn the lesson. You can't commit pass interference penalties, especially down the field. So I like the approach that they're taking. I think it's going to be something that we're going to see, moving along throughout the rest of the season because the important positions, the positions where we've seen this be a problem before, mainly that offensive line, they have enough depth there where, hey, you commit a penalty, you're coming out. You're coming out, and it may be for the rest of the drive. Depending on how bad of a penalty and how costly it is, it may be for the rest of the game if we feel like the guy that comes in can handle it. So that'll be interesting to see how that carries over into this matchup against a Charlotte team that is not the most disciplined group. One of the things you don't want to do is commit penalties and keep this team around. That's one of the biggest ways you can do it. Turnovers and penalties can keep a team like this in the game. So let's move to the keys to the game. The first one that I came up with is very simple, and it's set Connor Harrell up for success early because last week, like I said, Chip Lindsey did not do that. He came out with a game plan for some reason to try to get Max Johnson throwing the ball down the field. I don't understand why that was the game plan. It makes no sense. I know you wanted to lean on Amari and Hampton, but when you were throwing the football, and this was happening on second down, it wasn't just third down plays. Why were you trying to go down the field with a guy that we saw in the spring game, if people were there watching, that is far from his strength? I think this needs to be a game plan that is set up better for Connor Harrell. Part of that will be running the football with both Amarian and himself, but also you need to get some of those short routes going, especially, if the first drive doesn't go great, start using some of those screen plays, get some of those receivers that you really like involved. Use some of those, where you roll Harrell out of the pocket and have some of those short routes where you can hit a tight end in the flat and either they break a tackle or they might be wide open because of a miscommunication. Whatever. Those are the types of things you need to see in this game, because the most important thing is getting Connor Harrell settled into a rhythm.
And I think the best way to really get him involved is to use his legs, and really just because he's a mobile quarterback, and he's really dynamic in the running game. I think you're going to see a heavy dose of RPOs and really putting the pressure on the defense, making them commit one way or another. And then, all he has to do is to decide, does he give it? Does he keep it? And does he keep it and run, or does he do what he did last week, where it is keep it, but then pitch it down the field for a big play in the passing game? I think you're going to see a better game plan than what you saw last week. I think you'll see a much better attack of the passing game and understanding, until you get better protection from your tackles, everything needs to be quick and short and get the ball out, get your guys in space, and let these guys make plays after the catch. So, I don't think it's fair to expect Connor Harrell to put up 250 yards and 3 touchdowns, but I think you're going to see the ingredients of a quarterback that moving forward as you get into conference play, you're confident that you can still win games with, whether it's at home, whether it's on the road, because the ability is there. And I think he's a confident young man. He just now has to be rewarded with an offensive coordinator that puts a game plan together that brings out the best in his abilities.
Well, because here's the thing. If you open up the game by using the short passing game, using some of those RPOs that you talked about, I think what you're eventually going to do is be able to open up some of those opportunities down the field. If James Madison can hit big plays, you can hit big plays on this defense. And we saw that Connor is capable of hitting the big plays. He's got the arm to do it. It's just about getting him to a point where he is confident enough to make those throws down the field. Because last week, he really wasn't. The one throw that he had to make down the field to J.J. Jones, you could tell that he wasn't that confident in himself. And it's why that ball was wobbly, and a great job by J.J. Jones to make the play. But yeah, that's what you're hoping for in this game. You move on. I think defensively, the big thing for me is there's two things. Create turnovers is one of the keys, because this is a Charlotte team that turns the football over a lot. And they did it last year, and now it's carrying over into this year. As I mentioned in the opener, 2 interceptions from Max Brown, 1 fumble that he lost, and they also put the ball on the ground another time. Carolina, very opportunistic when it came to forcing fumbles last week, forced 2 of them, recovered 1. But this could be a game where you can pull down some interceptions if you're smart about how aggressive you are, and if you continue to cover the way that you did, especially Elijah Huzzy on the outside a week ago. So I think for Carolina, you want to create turnovers, give yourself some short fields for this offense, because if you do, it could be what allows you to pull away in this game.
Yeah, and I was talking about, with the discipline, like you build habits. You look at teams that force a lot of turnovers, they do it early on in the season, and it becomes a part of their identity as a defense. And I think Carolina is going to be better defensively, no question. But I think if they could turn the ball over and give their offense shorter fields, it's going to get the most out of what this offense can be this year. And so you've got a quarterback that is loose with the football. His decision making is not very good. And that's why you're going to see Jeff Collins, even though this is a group of 5 school coming in, really be aggressive and creative and dialing up blitzes and pressure, because when he's put in those situations, he usually puts the ball in harm's way. You look at the fumbles, I think Carolina should look to strike the football and attack it and be looking to punch it out, because that's also there as well. And so, this is something that if Carolina would have been a better defensive team the last couple of years at turning the ball over, it would have really overshadowed some of their shortcomings. If Carolina can be better defensively, combined with the ability to take the football away on a consistent manner, then this really puts this defense in a different stratosphere, and one that could really elevate this team to one that could contend in an ACC that after the first week of the season feels wide open. So, I think it's fair to expect and hope that Carolina forces at least 2 turnovers tomorrow in their home opener in Kenan Stadium.
Last thing they got to do in this game, last key, is tackle better, because we saw it last week. One of the ways that Minnesota was able to stay on the field was because Carolina was struggling to tackle. You missed 14. That's something that should be sticking in the mind of these guys, and they should be motivated to put together a better performance, because if they do, it's hard to see Charlotte being able to move the football down the field on them consistently. And if they can't do that, I know this offense didn't look great a week ago. You feel like there's a good chance Carolina can run away with this game.
Yeah, I think that what's really gonna this is where that consistency really comes into play, and this is where the coaching and the evaluating of film and tape, and then it being addressed in practice. How does it all carry over? And it is something that resonates, and I think it's going to be, because we know. I mean, the coaches tell you going into the game, yes, we want to tackle well. We know we're not going to tackle well. And this is something that coaches have had to adjust. Man, 10 years ago, it was no excuse. You expected your defense to play well. And coaches still tell you in the preseason the defense is ahead of the offense. That's without the tackling, though. And that's why you get into week 1 games and you typically see shootouts, and you see defenses not look the best, and then shores up and gets better and better as the season moves along. I think Carolina will do a much better job. I think there will be some plays that they'll do a much better job of finishing. There were some plays last week that I thought they didn't finish because they expected a whistle to be blown for whatever reason, and that didn't happen. And plays that should have been finished weren't. And I think that's going to be addressed as well. So there's frankly no excuse, because you don't want to give a group that isn't explosive offensively a chance to make big plays by simply not tackling. So I think you'll see a defense that was physical in a lot of manners last week be a lot more physical this week and do a much better job at finishing plays, something they struggled with last week against Minnesota.
All right, let's move to our predictions for this game. What do you see happening in the home opener tomorrow, 3:30 on ACC Network against the Charlotte 49ers?
Yeah, look, we know how good Mac Brown is in home openers. We know how important it is to win at home. And since he came back, Carolina's been a pretty good team in Kenan Stadium. That should continue tomorrow. I think you'll have an excited stadium off the win last week. I think this fan base will be ready to rally behind Connor Harrell. And, I think maybe not every Carolina fan is known or is aware of how Charlotte fans are acting, but Carolina doesn't want to lose this game. They don't want to lose at home to a group of 5 opponent. It's not fun. And so I think Carolina's going to play well. I think they'll build up what they did last week. I have Carolina winning this game rather comfortably, Give me the Heels 34-10.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the things that people have to realize is that this isn't going to look quite like some of the games. Even if Carolina wins and looks really good, it's not going to be as high scoring as some of the games previously when they had Sam and Drake. Those are games where Carolina's offense was just so dominant that these, teams, we're allowing 500 plus yards of offense. I don't know if they're going to do that in this game. I think it's certainly possible. I mean, you look at the success that James Madison had a week ago. Carolina's offense, even with the struggles at quarterback, it feels like they are better. And I think this will be a game where Connor Harrell, the plan will be to get him settled into the game, gain him a little bit of confidence. As I said, as Greg Ward says right here, I really think that Carolina gets into a rhythm early. They're able to score some points out of the gate. Charlotte's a team, as you mentioned, they can hang around. That's certainly possible. We saw it last year down in the Swamp, but I think that Carolina is going to come in motivated because they probably see the way that their own fan base was talking about last week. There are a lot of Tar Heel fans that still do not believe that last week was a great win for that team. They think that Minnesota is a terrible football team, that Carolina, what they showed you, that's what they're going to be the whole season. So I think this group is going to be motivated to come out and prove on the offensive side that last week was, just a rough start because it's week one. There were a lot of moving parts, especially once Max Johnson went down with the injury. And I think defensively, they want to prove that this is really who we are this year. It's not a flash in the pan. We are going to be a consistent defense. I think Carolina puts together a strong performance in this game on both sides of the ball. I like Carolina to win this one 49-7 over the Charlotte 49ers. And once again, you can catch the game tomorrow, 3:30 on ACC Network or on the Tar Heel Sports Network. Just check your local radio affiliates. Guys, make sure you head over to the website, get prepared for the game tomorrow. All the things that you need to know. We didn't talk about it here tonight, but the injury report, boy, for Charlotte, it is looking pretty lengthy. A lot of guys that are on there now. Biff Poggi, not exactly telling the truth that they're all starters, but there's still a pretty significant group that is on the injury report. Meanwhile, for Carolina, of course, Max Johnson is out. Caleb Hood, questionable. Same thing with Will Hardy, so we'll be keeping an eye on all of that stuff. But we'll have that preview article up for you first thing in the morning so that you guys can get all of the prep that you need. Now, of course, do that before you get in the car and go to the game. The best thing for you guys to do if you're going to the game, hey, maybe, you didn't catch the whole edition of the podcast. We'll have the audio edition posted. I'll also share that tomorrow so that you guys can listen to that on your way to Kenan Stadium. So plenty of ways to get ready for the game against Minnesota. Also, we didn't mention it here. I'll encourage you guys to go to the website and check it out. Max Johnson did talk to ESPN's Pete Thamel earlier today and gave him, a look at what he is planning on doing moving forward. This all from the hospital. He is still at the hospital in Minneapolis after having a second operation on his leg. From everything that we can tell, it seems like that operation went well, and he is now discussing his future with Pete Thamel. So make sure you head over to HeelToughBlog.com. Check out what he is envisioning for his future and how Mack Brown wants him to be involved this year with this year's team once he's able to get back to Chapel Hill. We'll, of course, have you covered with the recap of the game against Charlotte. After the game, I'll actually have that posted tomorrow night, so make sure that you guys keep an eye out for that. And then the recap edition of the podcast, we're going to do it Mondays because that's how we've always done it. So we'll do it on Monday. Make sure that you guys are there as we dive into whatever happens on the field for the Tar Heels that night or that afternoon. And, also we're keeping an eye on everything going on when it comes to Tar Heel basketball on the HeelToughBlog.com, because that's right. We had a guy that Carolina was really hoping they could get in the 2025 recruiting class. Jasper Johnson, he goes to Kentucky. Josh reacts to that on the website with an article on his commitment elsewhere and what it means for Carolina. So make sure you check that out on HeelToughBlog.com. And the biggest thing, every morning that you wake up for the latest news and opinions on the Tar Heels, check Heel Tough Blog. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. And as always, go Tar Heels.